Day. My name is Richard Wexler, and this is Caring in America, the podcast for caregivers and care recipients. We have a special guest with us today. I'm about to introduce him via his bio. Mike George helps families rewrite their caregiving story from one of sacrifice and exhaustion to one of joy, strength, and resilience by leveraging his 3 decades of experience as a family caregiver. He brings an intimate understanding of the burdens faced by those supporting the primary care of a family member. He leaned on that experience and the background that he has in AI, process improvement, and enterprise systems to create the Soaring Families Way, a 5-step method that blends empathy, empowerment, and practical solutions to equip families with the tools and skills they need to regain control, reduce stress, and find fulfillment on their caregiving journey. He has also developed the Pink Book for families, something that we will definitely talk about. Mike, are you there, sir?
I am, Richard. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So I think you may be the first guest that is sitting someplace out of the United States. Where are you sitting, sir?
Uh, I'm in Atlantic, Canada, in the province of New Brunswick on the East Coast.
Very good. I think you are our first guest in the great country of Canada. So welcome.
Thank you.
So I want to begin at the beginning. You are currently living a caregiving story with your son, Ben. Can you talk about that and how that also taught you all the realities of what caregiving is all about?
Yeah. So you mentioned 3 decades, and some days it's hard to believe that we've been doing this for that long. But Ben was born in the early 90s. He's our third child, and everything about the pregnancy was typical, and we seemed like things were, we kind of knew what to expect, except we didn't, because an hour after Ben was born, the neonatologists and all the other experts were concerned about what was happening with him, and that he was very, very sick. In fact, he had an enlarged liver and spleen. His head was too small. His blood platelets were dangerously low, and they even went so far as to say he may not live the day. And it was, well, it's impossible to kind of process all of that. All we heard was he may not live the day, and so began our caregiving journey. It was a week in the neonatal unit, trying to figure out what was going on, what the prognosis would be. And by the end of that week, he had stabilized enough that we could bring him home. But we were left with, all kinds of questions, uncertainty, and just the overwhelming feeling of we have no idea what to do next. Yeah, so it was. I guess that we were a whole lot younger than we are now, and we just kind of took it day by day and applied brute force and get through the day and get through the next one, get through the next emergency visit and the health issue and this, that, and the other thing. But eventually, after about 3 or 4 years, it kind of got into a pattern, and so we knew what was the limitations were. We knew or we thought the limitations were, and we kind of got into somewhat of a rhythm. But what we realized was that really, after we left the hospital and every other time with any sort of emergency situation, we were basically left on our own. A lot of it was, there's not really much anyone can do to help you, Mike, and so sorry for this. And, there weren't people lining up at our door to say, we can help, we can step in. And so I guess that was kind of the reality in the early days, is that, you're handed this laundry list of issues and no sort of plan or
Wow.
issue or solution to any of them.
Wow. I mean, and I mean, that's amazing. You know, folks, I talk about my 14 years, but what Mike is doing, and I've told him it's absolutely amazing. And they're still providing this care. And what you just talked about, you get a diagnosis to a sense. You understand there are these issues, but I know something you talk about, something we talk about with a plan to age. There's not really a roadmap, and as you like, what are you supposed to do? How am I supposed to do it? When? So, what was missing for your family, and how did that lead to creating the Pink Book?
So I guess there was one, I guess just to back up a little bit, one of the, I guess, sort of points of light in the whole darkness of understanding what Ben was all about. One of the doctors had told us at the end of that week was, don't worry about all the problems, just take him home and love him. And it was kind of like the simplest comment. And basically, it was, he's your son like every other, your other two children. And don't forget that. That's first and foremost what we had to do. And so that kind of led us to a different mindset in, yeah, there was no roadmap, but the only roadmap we had was what the other two kids were following. And so we tried to, you know, fit Ben into that path, that normative pathway of life. But it's still, when you have, I guess, sort of typical abilities, the roadmap is fairly straightforward and well traveled.
Sure.
The one with Ben's case, you're forging a new one. You're a pioneer, and so one of the highlights, or one of the sort of eye opener things that kind of led to us creating this Pink Book was when the kids were small. I think Ben was about 2. My father-in-law had a serious car accident, and he was in emergency surgery.
Wow.
So my wife Jan and I needed to get to the hospital to see what was going on, because despite all the other things that were happening in our life, this was number one. We had to be there, and so we had nobody was around at 11 p.m. that night, but we called a neighbor of ours, and who actually happened to be a nurse. And sure, I'll come up, I'll stay with them, no problem. But before we left to get to the hospital, she asked, if Ben wakes up, what meds does he take?
Yeah.
Or what should I do? Or if you're gone for a long time, what does he eat in the morning? And it was at that point we realized that she has no idea how to care for Ben, even though she's a
Wow.
nurse.
Right.
And it was, kind of a bit of a shock for us, because we're the ones who were only the ones taking care of him, in the sense that we knew what meds he took. And in fact, we didn't even have the meds all in one place in the house. They were kind of scattered everywhere, just because we knew where they were, so it didn't matter.
Yeah.
But in fact, it did. And so what we said is, don't worry about, and if he wakes up or you have a question, just call us and we'll figure it out. And then the next day, when we got back, we started writing everything down that we could think of. What meds does he take, the timing, and different sort of things around the how do you care for Ben, is any allergies that he had, and so on. And we wrote that down on just pieces of paper, and we found a pink binder in a drawer, and we shoved all those pieces of paper in a pink binder, and that became the Pink Book. And that started
Wow.
the sort of organizing and trying to simplify our life, because we realized we had to get it out of our head. And
Yeah.
if something happened to us, or if you needed somebody to step in because you had to, go to the hospital for whatever reason, we had no way of sort of transferring that knowledge and that information. And
Wow.
it was kind of an innocent way of documenting things, but we realized, quite soon thereafter that, well, we got to keep doing this. Like, we need to
Yeah.
add more things. We have to, take pictures of things, and all that. And so that's where it started. And that became kind of, I guess, a comforting factor that we actually had this stuff
Sure.
documented somewhere, right?
We talked a little bit before this podcast, and one of the things I think I mentioned to you, go back about 17, 18 years in my journey, and my wife had what we called the purple folder, and it was
Right.
minuscule but similar, where she wrote down all the doctor's information, she wrote down all the medication, she wrote down, I mean, we're managing the four individuals, the
Right.
different doctor appointments and so on. So if, I don't know if that folder still exists or somewhere along the line got thrown out, but a very simplistic thing of what you were doing. Question for you, and I know you're helping other folks with the Pink Book. Was there a time, a moment when you realized it was making a difference for another family?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So the Pink Book is part of a larger program that we've designed called the Caregiver Support Formula, and what that does is enable families to follow a formula, a step-by-step process to bring in caregivers into their home. How do they find the right people? How do they get their home organized and so on? And the Pink Book was a piece of that. Um, and when we were developing this, probably, what are we now? 2025. So I would say like 6 or 7 years ago, we were developing this formula so other families could use. There was one family that actually purchased the training program. And it was at that point that I thought, gee, people are trusting us enough to actually give us money to help this. And, that actually developed into a really good relationship with his family. And, all the feedback we got from them to say, how much has helped to organize their life and to feel, to have that confidence and feel empowered that they could actually do this journey was gold. It was we always knew that it could do that, but until it's outside of our family and someone else who's never seen it before, when
Sure.
you get that sort of testimonial, you realize, what, this is something real. It's not just theory.
Yeah.
This is something we've got to get in the hands of every family caregiver out there.
Yeah. And I know again from talking to you, we're on the same wavelength that so many people before something happens in their family, and I mainly deal with aging parents and so on, but when something happens, they don't think it's going to be that difficult. They don't think it's going to be that tough. They find out that mom broke her hip. She's many, many states away. Maybe they're outside the United States. She's still in the town where they grew up. They fly in thinking they'll be taking care of her for a week or so, if that long, and she'll be fine. I mean, is there a hard truth about caregiving that no one seems to want to admit, but families kind of learn the hard way?
Well, it's that example is a perfect one in that, you either are enter the world of this care by some event, like your mother breaks her arm, or you have an accident, or the birth of Ben, or you kind of back into it as you notice the decline in your parents little by little, and it's it's the kind of thing that I think it's more of a survival instinct. You think, well, it's not going to be that bad. As long as we do these things, we'll figure it out.
Yeah,
And then, things don't go according to plan. And then you do it again. Okay, well, we can adjust this thing. And over time, you start to, change the way you're dealing with things. And you just keep sort of bringing more things onto your plate. And you think you can do it, and especially if it's your family member, you feel this obligation that well, I've got to do it. Who else is going to do it? But the reality is that nobody can do this on their own. And in fact, we
right.
say to people, caregiving's not a solo act, and it's okay that you can't do it on your own. And in fact, you probably shouldn't do it on your own. So I think most families won't want to admit that because it's sort of giving up control or admitting that you can't do everything when in fact you probably shouldn't be doing it anyway.
No, and I agree with you. And I mean, look at this word caregiver. It's two words put together. I
Hmm.
mean, so we become, and most of us, like you say, something happens and then we jump in and we start providing care. But, and that's as you know better than almost anyone, it's a day in and day out process. But do people really apply the weight that that should be applied to what a caregiver does day in and day out?
Well, I think the short answer is no. And the other thing that I would say is that unless you're in it, you don't get it. In
Yeah,
that people can, that you can empathize with a family or what they're going through, but unless you're there, experience it every minute of every day, it's not the same. And I guess the word for me, the word caregiver is, I don't know. I guess we have to label things because the English language is so limited on how we can identify things, right, to describe it. But most families who are, involved in the care of their spouse or their child or their parents, they would never, when they're introducing themselves, they'd never self-identify as a family caregiver, myself included. I'd never say I'm Ben's caregiver. I'm his
yeah,
father,
yeah,
right? And so it's a bit of a um, it becomes a bit of a red herring, and it does sort of oversimplify the responsibility. But I haven't found a better word for that. And I guess it comes down to that because you don't identify or self-identify as a caregiver, that doesn't mean you're not doing the things that a quote unquote caregiver would do.
right. I talk about that I mean, my wife was the hands-on caregiver. I call myself what I tell other people. I was the project manager. I was the
Yeah.
guy online trying to find all the resources and do all that. So, folks, you may be the project manager, but you're still a caregiver. And I was doing that at midnight when I literally had 5 minutes, and Google was a lot different 20 years ago. And then I had to get up at 5 in the morning, 5 hours later, to make my long commute back to work. So whether you're hands on care or the project manager over that care, it it is something, and you said it, most people don't understand it until they get there. One of the words that's used a lot, we talked about a tiny bit, is burnout. And what can happen when, in my case, 11 years, in your case now over 30, and the silence, resentment, guilt, all these things can come into play. So do you find that the Pink Book helps families face that potential burnout head on?
Well, what it does, and I guess that's one of the um, one of the benefits that we hope that families will eventually understand by getting the Pink Book, is that it gets the information out of your head. And part of the thing with burnout is really, most family caregivers have this voice in the back of their head saying that they're not doing enough, right? Or they've set the bar so high that nobody could ever achieve it. And what that does is it keeps even though you probably are doing more than enough, there's this voice keeps harping at you that you're not. And so what happens is you actually pile more things on your plate. And what that leads to is, well, then you start to forget things. Or I forgot to do this. Hopefully, it's not medication. Or you make a mistake, right? And it's not because you're not doing enough, is because your brain can't hold all the information. There's too much of it there.
Yeah,
And so what the Pink Book does is it helps you get all that information out of your head and down onto paper. And then when you can kind of see it in front of you, um, then you can see it all clearly. The guilt that you had that you weren't doing enough, and the fact that that the fact that you may have missed something adds to more guilt. But if it's out there on paper and you have things in this pink book, that guilt starts to quiet down a
Sure.
little bit,
Sure.
and then you start to feel a little more confident, and you definitely feel relief, right? And so that is something that helps you to kind of calm that cycle, and then the burnout starts to um, become less, because now you can step back for a minute and you can actually breathe. And a recent example for me, when you say we've been in this game for a long time. Earlier this week, our morning caregiver, part of what we call Team Ben, she called in sick because she wasn't feeling well. Which that's life. Everybody has things going on, and they can't always come when you expect them to. And so that threw our day into a tizzy, because
Sure.
we had all these other things we needed to do, but yet Ben's got to get out of bed. We can't just say, "Oh, sorry, Ben, we'll get to you tomorrow,"
Yeah.
right, when she's back. And so you have to dive in and get it done. But one of the things is that, because I don't do it every day, getting his breakfast prepared and those sorts of things I don't remember. And I don't have to remember, because what I did is I went to our pink book and said,
Yeah.
these are the steps you go through.
There
This
it
is what you
is.
have to do, even as
Yeah.
something as simple as a meal. Right. And so what that did is, it didn't stop all my head from spinning on all the other things I had to do, but it gave me that space and that relief to say,
Yeah.
okay, the focus has been, and here's what we're going to do. And it's, we don't have to remember every single detail.
No, that is awesome advice. I mean, folks, I talk about this all the time when we're talking about older loved ones and so on, and I use the percentage 95% of us are going to wind up needing care. I mean, that's a huge number. And that care can literally be a few hours because you did something very minor. It can be many years, or most likely something in between. What we're trying to do with a plan to age is really educate people about these complexities of care and about these complexities of aging and what that means to the individual and what that means to the family. And then one of the huge pieces within a plan to age is exactly what it says, teaching people why it's so important to plan, knowing there's a 95% chance that loved ones around you are going to need care, going to need assistance. I simply ask, wouldn't it be a little bit easier if you were prepared instead of having to really figure out all of this once it happens? I've had a lot of families, Mike, say to me, and they may have said something to you, we're fine. We, we're getting by. But like I know, behind the scenes, that's probably not true. Any advice for them?
It's an example that comes up in our life a lot. It's, how much do you actually tell people the truth of how you're feeling? If you go into a work setting and they say, how was your weekend?
Yeah. Yeah, I know
Right?
exactly where you're going. Yeah.
And you can't, you usually say, oh yeah, it was okay. There's no way you can get into the details of what just happened, right? But so for most family caregivers, when they say they're fine, I don't believe them, um, because they're able to manage, and they're able to keep their head above water. But I know there's a whole lot going on in behind, and I guess what we try to help families realize is that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to raise your hand, to ask for help.
Yep.
And in fact, it's a power move, we say, because what you're doing is you're taking it away from you as the focal point, because it's not about you. It's about your family member, right? And by raising your hand and asking for help, what you're actually saying is that I want to have the best possible care for my family member. And how do I get that? I can be part of that equation, but I don't have to do everything. And that actually then opens up new things and space for you to kind of be the project manager, as you said, right? Or you don't have to be the hands and feet of the person all the time. And then you're creating this picture of what type of support do they need and who can provide it. And that's a whole different mindset. And it takes the burden off of you that you have to be the only one who's carrying the load.
And that's great advice. And one of the things we're trying to do is really educate people when you're feeling like this and you're the caregiver and it's really tough and you're down and you really you don't feel like you can tell people what's going on. Hopefully there's some friend in your life you can turn to or turn to clergy. One of the things we're trying to do is help employers understand as as we're aging. Canada's doing the same thing. The U.S. is doing the same thing. It's reality. Over 100 million people over 50. The oldest boomers turning 80. Employers have to start realizing what they were seeing 10, 15 years ago. They're going to see a lot more now and in the future as employees are in that position where I have to stay productive at work. I like my job, plus I need the income, but I have to take care of mom, or I have to take care of dad, or I have to take care of grandmother, whomever it may be. Making sure there's people that the caregiver can reach out to and talk to through this journey. As we get ready to wrap up, Mike, what information do you want to give out website, phone number, email where people can connect with you?
Sure, be happy to. So the best way to get me from email is just mike@servingfamilies.com. People can text me or call me, and my cell is 506-977-2644. And if they want to learn more about the Pink Book, all they have to do is go to newpinkbook.com, and you can see all the information of what it gives you. And that gets you to our website as well. So.
Great information, folks. A wonderful conversation. I give Mike and his wife so much credit for what they've been doing for all of these years. Please, as I always ask folks, please share this episode with those around you. You know, I wish Mike and his family had not been going through this. They obviously have, and it was a great episode today. So as we get ready to sign off, folks, as I always say, until we talk again, have yourself an awesome day.